Hello, now we're going to go back and we're going to start with part two of the midterm review. Okay. We're going to just kind of, before the first part, and we were talking about the FTP, which was the Federal Theater Project. And we're also talking about the four parts of the Federal Theater Project. Of course, that's the living newspaper, radio, theater, then they had regular theater, then they had the Negro Theater Unit, which was African American theater. And that is the part that I want to just elaborate a little bit on. So with African American theater, one play that came from that was Voodoo Macbeth. Voodoo Macbeth was an adaptation of Macbeth. As a matter of fact, everything was exact. The exact story of the play of Macbeth, which took place, of course, in Scotland. But Voodoo Macbeth took place in Haiti. So the only difference with Voodoo Macbeth and Shakespeare's regular Macbeth was that Voodoo Macbeth took place in Haiti. But that was a great play that made a lot of money for the African American theater. Okay, that was part of the Federal Theater Project. Sometimes people get that confused with another part called the ANT that we're going to talk about later, American Negro Theater. But remember that the Voodoo Macbeth was connected with the FTP, which was the Federal Theater Project. Okay, so now let's go on and let's talk about Vondeville shows and minstrel shows. How did they evolve? Where did they come from? Exactly what were they? Well, remember, they needed different forms of entertainment, back then. So theater, not necessarily theater, but just comedy and different acts like that was a form of entertainment. So from that emerged, you have the minstrel shows and the Vondeville shows. The minstrel shows were shows that depict and devalued African American life. When you think of the minstrel shows, you think of people that are painted in blackface. You have the exaggerated lips, and then you have, of course, you have the exaggerated dressings of it, and it devalued African American life. And it was really a comedy routine that was kind of based on that. The Vondeville shows had minstrel acts in it. However, the Vondeville shows were more elaborate shows. They were traveling shows. They had famous people in the shows, famous actors in the shows, dancers in the shows, musicians in the shows. It was really a grand performance when it comes to Vondeville. And like I said, with the Vondeville shows, those were traveling shows, whereas minstrel shows were more of local shows. And two people that really emerged from the minstrel shows and the Vondeville shows were George Walker and Bert Williams. Okay, George Walker and Bert Williams, they made quite a bit of money off when they created their own Vondeville show. And these were African Americans that created their own shows, so they were actually in blackface doing the shows. And what made their shows so very popular was that they pulled out all the stops. It was a top-notch show. And because of that, people wanted to see their shows. So they had, all the elaborates, the entertainment, the musicians, they had the singers, they had different acts that was going on in it. So their shows were top-notch shows, and they did very well with their Vondeville shows. Okay? Now, what changed and why did kind of the Vondeville shows, minstrel shows fade out? Basically, after the Civil War, things began to change. And African Americans wanted to see themselves represented in a different light. So, they wanted their, what they were living. I mean, you have African Americans that had their own businesses. They were doing well. They had families. And so they wanted to be represented the way they were actually seen during that time. And they wanted, that respect of that. And so that's what changed. It changed after the Civil War. You can see the beginning of change with that, okay? And of course, things began to fade out a little bit, later because entertainment also changed as well. Earlier, we were talking about the FTP, the Federal Theater Project, and we were talking about the different parts. And one of those parts, of course, was the African American theater. After the FTP ended, of course, in 1939, due to, of course, lack of funding, the ANT emerged. And the ANT was ANT, which is called the American Negro Theater, is what it's abbreviated for, and it lasted from 1940 to 1949. So right after the FTP ended, which was in 1939, the ANT emerged. And this was an opportunity to allow African Americans to continue to do theater. So not only did they do theater for 9 years, but it was also a training program for several African Americans, such as Sidney Poitier and Harry Belafonte. They came from the ANT, because the ANT, not only did they do theater, but they also trained their actors how to act, how to do theater, how to represent themselves in this. And they also were funded. And so this gave them an opportunity to really do a lot of theater. And of course, this emerged from Harlem, New York. People that I want to mention that were very important during this time, African American actors, was Charles Gilpin. Charles Gilpin is noted as the first African American actor to be taken as a serious actor in America. And then we have Ira Aldridge. Ira Aldridge was the first African American actor that was very successful overseas. Okay, so this is also during that time period as well, the early time period. So Ira Aldridge, of course, he did a lot of Shakespeare and things overseas, but he became very wealthy and he was very well known overseas. Another person that I would like to mention is Anita Bush, and this particular time happened before the ANT. Okay, so before the American Negro Theater. From the time 1915 to 1932, Anita Bush was over first it was called the Bush Players, and later it was changed to the Lafayette Players. And those was another African American group that did theater, okay, and that, for, quite a few years. And so I wanted to also, like I said, bring her to the forefront. Anita Bush was over the Lafayette Players, another African American theater group. Okay. So African Americans, they definitely, in the beginning, they have really contributed toward theater and the arts, lifting the morals of individuals. Move up a little bit, okay? And we're going to talk about two playwrights. Not so current, but more current than the last ones, of course. The two playwrights that we're going to focus on are Lorraine Hansberry and August Wilson. August Wilson, of course, is an African-American playwright. One thing that made him different than the other playwrights was that his plays were grouped in what they call the Pittsburgh cycle of the 10 plays. And the reason why it was named this is because all of his plays, except for one that's kind of based in Chicago, were basically about different characters in Pittsburgh. And he used different time periods and didn't have the exact same time period with all of them. but all of his characters were based on African American life or African American character, and that character was based in Pittsburgh. Okay, and of course, one that we are known for, that we are familiar with, or more familiar with, is Fences. Fences is about an African American man that was a Negro League baseball player, and then he ended up getting into some trouble, and when he went to prison, he ended up going, when he got out, he became a garbage man, and because that, he was very resentful for his family, and kind of took things out on his family, and it's a fantastic story. Of course, there's a lot more to that story, but he's also known for Genty. That's one of my favorite ones, which kind of talks about men that are driving, for the taxi service, and so it's very interesting. So I'm also going to have a link that you can just watch the different synopses of his plays. But of course, like I said, what made him different were his 10 plays. Okay. The next thing that we're going to do is talk about Lorraine Hansberry. Lorraine Hansberry. Of course, we know about A Raisin in the Sun, but she also did other plays. But one of the plays that I want to kind of bring to the forefront is the play that's about her life, and that is called To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. Now, this was published after her death. Her ex-husband, Robert Negro, he went ahead and, published the play, and of course the play was done. The play is still being done today, actually. And that is just the memoirs of her life growing up. How did she emerge into the playwright and the woman that she eventually became? She was an activist, civil rights activist. She was more than just a writer. I mean, her words were just so powerful, and she was just an amazing thinker. Her words just inspired. Just was so inspirational, and not just on the page, but in so many other aspects of life. Okay, so that is what the next play, like I said, that she did, which was To Be Young, Gifted, and Black. That is the only two that you need to just kind of know what it's a little bit about. Young, Gifted, and Black is about her life, and of course, what A Raisin in the Sun is about. The other things that I want to go over, of course, are definitions. Of course, I want you to be able to know what is, remember we talked about what farce is and what is connected to, what melodrama is connected to, two types of dramas, comedy and tragedy, and what they are also connected to. And that sums things about it. Okay, so just review all of your notes, and if you have any questions, of course, just tell me in my email or send me an email, and I'll be glad to reply to you. Okay, thank you.